In the early morning hours of May 13, 1862, on a dark, overcast night, the shadowy figure in the wheelhouse guided the Confederate steamer through the still waters of Charleston Harbor. A blast from the steam whistle to each of the forts protecting the harbor signaled a friendly vessel was underway. Barely able to make out the faint form of a man at the helm, the unsuspecting Confederate guards manning the fortifications recognized the given signals and the Southern flag flapping in the breeze. The sleepy guards waved the ship past the checkpoints toward the open ocean. Once granted safe passage past the forts, the dreams of a brash 23-year-old slave drew closer to reality. Under cover of darkness as Charleston slept, Robert Smalls deftly guided the side-wheel steamer, the CSA Planter, away from the bonds of slavery in Charleston, South Carolina. At the end of the line was freedom for the daring African-American piloting the stolen Confederate ship. If the perilous scheme proved successful, the guarantee of a new life awaited his family and the several black families stowed away beneath the deck. If caught, a rendezvous with the hangman for the brazen escapade was a sure thing. A safe haven beyond the reach of the rebel artillery still loomed far in the distance. Tension gripped the renegade captain, risking all for a shot at redemption. Trying not to draw suspicion, Smalls patiently kept the slow-moving steamer chugging forward at a sluggish pace of 10 knots. Thoughts of a new beginning raced through his head as the ship cleared the inlet. With the lights of Charleston growing faint, a rash of excitement washed over the bold captain. On the distant horizon, the beautiful sight of the blockading Union Navy anchored in the distance had at last appeared in the early morning light. The southern harbor slowly drifted further from view as the Navy flotilla drew nearer. The shackles of slavery dissipated in the wake of the Planter as the Confederate steamer cautiously approached the fleet of Federal ships. A collective prayer of thanks ascended up to the heavens from the contingent of relieved runaways. A few soft, spiritual verses likely glided over the waves. A rendezvous with destiny was now certain. One long celebratory discharge from the steam whistle proclaimed victory. Off the bow of the ship waited salvation. Far off the stern came condemnation. To discourage being fired upon by the guns from the open ports of the suspicious U.S. fleet, the black crew of the Planter quickly hoisted a white flag and lowered the Confederate flag for the last time. When the Federals saw the white flag, they welcomed the Confederate vessel into the service of the U.S. Navy. The Federal Navy now had one more ship in her fleet. A mortified Confederacy had one less. After Federal officers boarded the Planter, Robert Smalls snapped to attention, offered a salute, and proclaimed,
"I am delivering this war material, including these cannons, and I think Uncle Abraham Lincoln can put them to good use."
Besides the Planter's armament of 2 cannons, the cargo included 4 cannons for future use at a southern fort. More importantly, maps detailing the location of mines in the harbor saved many U.S. ships from destruction in future operations. Robert Smalls was no stranger to the docks around Charleston. A favorable relationship with his owner allowed him from a young age to work assorted jobs in the harbor in return for most of the earnings. Starting as a lamplighter on the streets of Charleston, Robert's boundless ambition pushed him ever further. In time, he earned a position on the crew of the Planter. Being a quick study, mastering all aspects of life aboard ship came easily. Not long after serving on the steamship, the Confederates recognized his astute knowledge of the harbor and elevated Smalls to pilot. Robert Smalls married in 1859 and had 2 children by 1862. With a dim view of the future, he sought to purchase his freedom and that of his family. The steep purchase price of $800 was far above the meager savings of a slave. It was at that point the disgruntled Smalls hatched a desperate plan to escape the clutches of slavery. Severe retribution for escaping slaves required patience before acting on his scheme. A prime opportunity finally presented itself on May 12, 1862, when the Confederate captain of the Planter and his senior officers went ashore for entertainment. Word quickly went out to all the families of the Planter's black crewmen to rush to the already determined location to be ready for immediate pickup. Robert hastily dressed in a gray uniform. A straw hat similar to one so favored by the actual captain further supported the charade. When Smalls hoisted the anchor, there was no turning back. The guards in the harbor had no reason to suspect mischief. Robert knew all the proper signals. An embarrassed Confederacy awoke in the morning to learn of the insolent thief in the night. A boatload of illiterate slaves openly commandeered the Planter right past their numerous defenses and bid a fond farewell to a life of bondage. Celebrity followed Robert Smalls for his audacious feat. Prominent figures and presidents alike sought out the newly crowned hero. 2 weeks after the nautical thievery, the former slave visited the White House to regale a thankful President Lincoln with his extraordinary story. Shortly after his presidential audience, Smalls and fellow crew members received half the value of the captured Confederate transport. The rewards fell like rain on the African-American heroes. Smalls' knowledge of the harbor and precise location of the mines proved invaluable to Fleet Admiral Samuel DuPont. The admiral wasn't one to pass up such a strategic advantage regardless of race. DuPont hired Smalls as the Planter's new pilot. Once again gracing the deck of the Planter, Uncle Abe's newest sailor now swore allegiance to the stars and stripes flying overhead. Smalls served his country in 17 engagements till the end of the war. In one particular encounter in December 1863, his courage and valor saved the Planter from being recaptured by Confederate forces. Caught in a vicious crossfire by rebel guns, the cowering captain of the Planter thought the only remedy was surrender. One courageous black pilot thought otherwise. Fearing the loss of the Planter and knowing that he and the black deckhands would be executed on the spot, Robert seized control of the ship and guided her to safety. Twice a hero in naval actions, his latest act of bravery vaulted Smalls beyond his own expectations or that of the nation. Never before in the history of the U.S. Navy had an African American commanded a United States ship. The USS Planter now belonged to Captain Robert Smalls, along with a lofty salary of $150 a month. The runaway slave didn't break down the racial barrier, he shattered it. Robert Smalls continued to execute his duties with distinction for the remainder of the war. Most satisfying for the 25-year-old black captain was guiding the Planter back into the familiar waters of Charleston Harbor in April of 1865 for the ceremonial raising of the U.S. flag over Fort Sumter. Standing tall at the helm, a rush of pride surged like a rising tide in the heart of Captain Robert Smalls. He proudly sailed the Planter into the waters of his enslaved youth, where he pirated the steamer 3 years earlier. Still holding a favorable sentiment for Beaufort, South Carolina, the homesick Smalls returned to the Palmetto State after the war. Life changed drastically in Beaufort for the one-time boy slave. In a stunning reversal of fortune, he purchased his former master's house. Born in a cabin behind the estate, he now reigned supreme as master of his own domain in the same house where he and his mother labored in bondage. Smalls was back home. Integrity and honor now resided at Beaufort. Today, the house whose unusual history saw both sides of the slavery issue is a National Historic Landmark. After the Civil War, Robert's star continued to rise in rapid fashion with his election to the South Carolina Senate. Not satisfied with local politics, Congressman Smalls served 5 terms in the United States House of Representatives. An irrepressible slave boy born into servitude ascended from a ramshackle cabin in Beaufort all the way to Capitol Hill. An incredible trajectory for a black man few thought possible in 19th century America. 10 years after the Civil War, the ordinary wooden sidewheel vessel that launched Smalls on his remarkable journey was thrashed in a storm and later abandoned by her new captain. News of the historic planter's demise saddened Robert. A dear friend was gone. In 2014, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reportedly discovered the wreck of the planter off the coast of South Carolina. Finding the sunken vessel resurrected the legacy of the gallant Robert Smalls, a gritty black man whose life changed forever aboard a steamer he sailed into the history books. Smalls died in 1915 at age 75. Inspiration from his story should be a lesson for today. The seldom told and forgotten tale of Robert Smalls, who rose far above his miserable station in life, demonstrates how seemingly insurmountable odds dissolve when pitted against the indomitable and resolute power of the human spirit.